Hello everyone, my name is Tobias, and today I'll be covering a peer-reviewed research paper that expands upon Chapter 8, Everyday Memory and Memory Errors, and Chapter 10, Visual Imagery. Specifically, the research paper expands upon source monitoring errors through visual imagery. The research article is titled Visual Imagery and False Memories for Pictures, a Functional Magnetic Resonance Imaging Study in Healthy Participants. This was published on January 3, 2017, and the study was also conducted at Sant Joan de Déu Hospital in Barcelona, located in Spain. The aim of the research paper is to investigate how visual imagery contributes to the formation of false memories, specifically by examining neural similarities between imagined and perceived experiences. Through functional MRI, the study seeks to understand how visual imagery might lead individuals to mistake imagined events for real ones, exploring the brain regions involved in the process to clarify the cognitive mechanisms behind reality monitoring errors. The theoretical background for the paper revolves around the concept of false memory formation, particularly how visual imagery can affect one's ability to accurately recall visual experiences. The study explores how the brain processes visual imagery and actual perception, investigating the overlap in neural activation. The researchers draw on theories related to the visual buffer and memory accuracy, examining how imagery might lead to reality monitoring errors, where imagined and real events are confused. Reality monitoring failure appears to be involved in hallucinations and can occur in any modality. More particularly, failure to discriminate between imagined and perceived pictures might be involved in visual hallucinations. Visual imagery and visual perception might have common neural substrates in healthy people as well as in people with visual hallucinations. The neural mechanisms underlying false memories for pictures have been investigated at both the production and retrieval phases. Visual mental imagery might be critical in the ability to discriminate imagined from perceived pictures. The aim was to investigate the neural basis of this specific type of reality monitoring process in individuals with high visual imagery abilities. Although many studies have explored the misattribution of imagined pictures to perception, no functional neuroimaging study, as far as we know, has investigated proneness to visual imagery in relation to these errors. Visual imagery proneness might be critical in the false remembering of non-presented pictures. However, most studies explicitly requested the participants to generate visual mental images of the items, and therefore spontaneous visual imagery was not assessed. The researchers' objective was to determine in healthy individuals prone to visual imagery the neural basis of the confusion between spontaneously imagined pictures and perceived pictures, a mechanism that could be crucial in the formation of visual hallucinations. Several methods were put into place before the experiment could first begin. 26 healthy participants, 10 females and 16 males with normal or corrected to normal vision, were recruited from the general population by means of announcements. The participants' age had a mean of 37.3, a standard deviation of 9.1, and an education level mean that equaled 5.9. This was measured from a scale of 1 to 8, starting with 1 equaling no studies and 8 equaling a doctorate degree. Verbal IQ had a mean of 24.2 and an SD which equaled 5. The inclusion criteria were age between 18 and 60 years and fluency in Spanish. The exclusion criteria were neurological or mental illness, intellectual disability, head injury, alcohol or drug abuse in the past 6 months, and current severe physical disease, as well as the standard exclusion criteria for participation in fMRI procedures, namely claustrophobia and metallic implants included fitted pacemaker and cochlear implants. Hallucination proneness was measured using a Spanish version of the Launay-Slade Hallucination Scale, or LSHS for short, a self-questionnaire which assesses non-clinical hallucinations within various modalities, with 2 additional visual imagery items seeing shapes and clouds or patterns, which were rated on a scale of 0 to 3, and validated in a sample of 210 people. These 2 items created a visual imagery score used to form 2 subgroups. 9 participants with scores of 0 or 1 were in the low visual imagery group, while 7 with scores of 2 or higher were in the high group. 10 participants with ambiguous scores of 2, scoring 1 on each item, were excluded from visual imagery analysis because it was unclear whether they should be included in the high or low visual imagery subgroups. Next, there was a global hallucination proneness score that was tallied by adding up the subscores for all LSHS items excluding the 2 new items. Subgroups of participants with high and low global hallucination proneness scores were defined. 10 participants with a score of 3, 4, or 5 were excluded from the analysis, contrasting these subgroups. Auditory, nonverbal, and verbal hallucination proneness scores were computed as well by adding up the subscores obtained on the corresponding items. Proneness to delusions was assessed by means of the Peters Delusion Inventory Scale. Subgroups of participants with high and low delusion proneness scores were defined. 5 participants who scored 3, 4, or 5 were excluded from these subgroup comparisons. Certain fMRI data had to be discarded due to technical problems. For the material, 90 items were selected, including 72 common objects such as saws, aprons, envelopes, and 18 vegetables, carrots, cauliflower, onions, and so on. Participants were presented with either the mere verbal label of the item or the picture of the item along with its verbal label. Half of the items were presented as single words and the other half as word and picture pairs. Two versions of the stimuli were prepared. The 45 stimuli that were presented as words in one version were presented as word and picture pairs in the other. The use of each version was counterbalanced among subjects. All material was presented to participants throughout via presentation. Before both the encoding and the recall phases, participants were administered a few practice trials to ensure familiarity with the task. During the encoding phase, items were presented individually in a pseudo-random order, each displayed for 3.5 seconds and separated by fixation crosses. The time in between items varied from 5.5 to 9 seconds. Optimized for reliable activation patterns based on a pilot study. Participants performed an implicit encoding task by classifying items as vegetables or other using a button press, unaware of a later recall task. The computer recorded correct and incorrect responses as well as misses. However, since there were very few responses that were scored as a miss, that data was not modeled within the dataset. During the recall phase, after a 6-minute delay during which a structural MRI was taken, participants were told they would see labels of the previously shown items and would need to remember if a picture had accompanied each item. Labels were shown one at a time for 3.5 seconds in a new pseudo-random order. With similar timing to the encoding phase, participants responded by pressing a button for with picture or without picture. Correct and incorrect responses, including omissions and false picture memories, were recorded along with response times and mistrials. The results for this experiment, out of the 45 pictures shown, participants correctly recalled an average of 25.4 as pictures. For words shown, an average of 9.5 were mistakenly recalled as pictures. Response times were longer for false memories of pictures than for correctly recalled pictures. Using model-based fMRI, researchers identified brain activity patterns associated with confusion between presented and imagined images. 4 response types were identified for both the encoding and recall tasks. Few missed responses were excluded, and analysis controlled for verbal IQ and sex to reduce confounding effects. It's important to note that participants who scored high visual imagery scores, activation of the amygdala, left inferior occipital gyrus, insula, and precuneus were observed, when high visual imagers encoded words later remembered as pictures. At the recall phase, these same participants, when forming false memories, high brain performance was activated in their left middle frontal gyrus, a part of the brain associated with working memory and linguistic tasks, and areas with low brain activity and inferior and superior parietal lobes, which are associated with sensory processing, including visual imagery processing, were also activated. Participants that scored low visual imagery scores that had false memories did not activate the gyrus, but did activate the inferior and superior parietal lobes. So, what does this all mean? The implications of the research from this paper suggest that strong visual imagery can lead to increased false memories, as imagining events activate similar brain regions to those involved in real perception. This has implications for areas like eyewitness testimony, where vivid imagination may interfere with accurate recall, and for therapeutic contexts where visual imagery is used. Understanding the neural basis of these memory distortions can help inform practices to mitigate false memories in both legal and clinical settings.